Welcome back to the I Help Men Dress Better podcast. Uh, Shlomo Hamnick, your host. I'm really excited about today's topic. A little bit still sad because I actually spoke a little bit about the topic I'm going to speak about, which is handling criticism, specifically when it comes to style. But I think this can apply to all areas of life. But I did touch on this in a previous recording, and unfortunately, the sound was not captured, even though I tested my microphone. Um, so while I am still sad that I lost that, uh, that recording, I'm I'm excited to come back to this topic in a slightly different way from the way I approached it then, which you will never hear because it was never recorded. So, you know, back when I was in Israel, so after high school, I spent a few years in Israel, learning in a small institution there. And during those years, I would come back around usually like March or May for one of the Jewish holidays. And every time I flew home, I would buy in the airport kiosk, usually I'd buy a GQ and an Esquire. So this was still kind of more on my journey. And when I was still relying a lot on outside information, before I had learned, the frameworks that I use and that I teach, and that have, really equipped me to tackle style in a clearer way and, really have a clear vision. But this was before then, before I had learned to trust myself. And I, you know, I love those airport kiosks. It's like the little desk and all the snacks right behind you. So I, I got my GQ and my Esquire, and I, read them on the 14-hour flight home. I always had a stopover, so I don't remember if I bought them in the Israel airport or if I would buy them like at my stopover, whether or not they had that at the kiosk. But either way, long flight, a lot of time to read, look through, do my preliminary skim, read the different articles that I was interested in, and come back to the ones that hadn't caught my eye the first time around. And I remember this so clearly. I think it was for like spring, summer. It was this kind of trend forecast of, knit ties. Now, right now, knit ties are everywhere. They're not they're not even considered trendy or not. They're just all over the place. But this was back in probably like 2014, and knit ties, like the knit ties with like the flat bottom, they really hadn't they really hadn't been in style in at least a decade. And like this was something that, people weren't really wearing, at least not cool people. Some people still had it left over from the last time that trend had run through, and it wasn't something you saw everywhere. And this was this trend forecast that these are coming back in, and they're going to be kind of the it trend for suiting, coming into spring. So, I was excited. I'm like, great, I'm validated in this decision, right? Someone else has told me that this is happening soon. And so, I can go buy this thing, and I know that it's stylish. Like, I know I'll be stylish if I buy this thing. So I went immediately to Marshalls and TJ Maxx, which my haunt, and I picked up two knit ties, one of them in like a dark green and the other in a dark purple. I mean, they were genuinely beautiful ties. I don't even think they were silk. I don't know that silk versions were in my price point back then, but I was excited. And I remember I remember buying these ties and wearing these ties and being excited about them and getting a lot of pushback and criticism from friends, family, and just, people in my periphery, in acquaintances, But honestly, a lot from my family, you know, cousins, aunts, uncles. And at that point in my life, I was handling criticism very, very different from how I had been handling it before. You know, when I was younger, um, I was very, very, very sensitive to criticism, and you know, I I I took it all very seriously. I was, you know, deeply hurt by it. Depending on, you know, whether I cared about what the person thought or not, you know, I would, you know, either take it very, very seriously and just like get very anxious, get very fearful about not following that criticism, essentially taking it as gospel, as, you know, the right thing, and I was doing something wrong and they were, you know, correcting my bad choices, my bad behavior. Or I would get, you know, very upset. Um, and and basically not react well. You know, big emotional displays. Looking back, a lot of that has to do with, you know, ADHD, and that's a topic for another day. But you know, I really did not handle criticism well. Every critique, first of all, it felt like, you know, I had done something wrong and it was being corrected. So I trusted everybody's authority. And the other thing is I took it very personally. So the critique was not just about the thing being critiqued, right? Like, oh, I don't like that tie. Okay, I'm not a tie, right? It was no, like, I don't like you. I don't like you as a person, the depth of who you are, right? I took that whole thing very personally, right? My tie was me. It was a representation of me, and the fact that they didn't like it meant that they didn't like me. And you know, I had to change in order for them to like me. And so when so you know, getting these ties was a really big jump for me in the way that I handled criticism, because now I had something to rely on, right? I knew that this was the next thing, right? This was cutting edge. This was what was coming down the pipeline. So of course they won't like it, right? I know you're not going to like it because you don't know that this is going to be cool. And like, won't you feel stupid, right? Won't you feel silly when everybody's wearing this and, you know, you didn't get on board when it, you know, when it was coming down the pipeline. And for the first time in my life, I felt, you know, a certain power over the criticism, right? I finally had this defense where I it was almost like it was the first time that I realized, oh, someone can say something and not be an authority on it, right? They can say, oh, I don't like that, and I can feel I can say, oh, well, the authority says that this is good, and you're saying this is bad. So you're clearly not the authority. It was the first time I was able to, you know, separate those two concepts. And granted, at this time I was in my late teens, probably 18 or 19. And as surprising as that may be, that was the first time that I had really been able to separate those concepts. And that was a big deal for me. And since then, I have had two more iterations of the way that I handle criticism. And I'm very fortunate that I was able to go on that path of not handling criticism well to having an authority to rely on and realizing that criticism does not always come from an authority. And somewhere along the line, realizing that a criticism of me, I think at this time I still felt like it was a personal attack, but I didn't have to let it penetrate because it wasn't legitimate, right? Somewhere down the line, I don't know if I can think of the exact moment when that happened. I'll, you know, see if I can dig it up in the mental banks, but you know, I was able to work up the idea that the criticism doesn't have to cut me so deep. I don't have to let it in, right? Not only can I write it off as kind of unfounded or not the authority, but I can just take it as it is, right? Like, if I like pizza and I'm eating pizza and someone else says they don't like pizza, that's not a reflection on me. That's just a reflection on their interest in pizza, right? And they might say, "Oh, I like sushi better," right? I think you hear this with kids all the time, and you start to realize that as adults, so many of us we say things without thinking, and there isn't really an intent there. There may not even there may not be ill intent, and there may not even be intent. It may just be this knee-jerk reaction that this person has to seeing something and needing to voice their opinion on it, right? Like that might be a them issue, or it is a them issue, if it's an issue at all. And so I think somewhere along the line of me getting to that place where I was able to deconstruct both of those beliefs that I had, um, was this sort of third iteration of how I handled criticism, which was, like the witty comeback, right? Oh, well, you criticized me. And if I can kind of get you back, if I can get my retort and it, you know, cuts kind of the right amount, not too deep, right? You don't want to be like a jerk or a monster, right? You want to kind of retort with the right thing, touch on an insecurity, but not, you know, alienate or infuriate someone. Um, that was a response that I kind of went to on that journey, right? Was, oh, I can kind of train myself to, when criticism comes in, have this sort of snap, knee jerk, easy like response where I could kind of cut back. And where I am now, um, is I know that that is not the best response. That is not the response that I want to have. And, sometimes I will, push back or play back, just for fun, not because, I'm not hurt by it. So it's like, because I am hearing it as kind of less critical, then I might push back and make a joke of it and have fun with it. So that's maybe like a degree off of that, where I'm not trying to hurt the person, but I'm trying to sort of diffuse it with humor. Though I am paring that back because it doesn't play very well on social media. It doesn't play very well in written text. I've noticed that a lot of people, when I respond that way, um, they they will jump into sort of gaslight me like, "It was a joke, bro," right? And th that is gaslighting, because a lot of the times their their comment or their criticism was actually meant kind of harshly, and I'm responding jokingly and relaxed, but that context is lost. So that's something that I'm trying to back off, not just in my online social life, but also in my real life, because I do think that that can reflect badly, and that's not really who I want to be. And that brings us to, you know, where I'd like to go and where I think I'd like to believe I am. Um, a good degree of the time, when I'm resourced and doing well, is just hearing it. Okay, that's great. The other response, and this is from Jefferson Fisher. If you've engaged any of his work, he's great. He's really, really good at communication, especially diffusing, you know, criticism, interruption, sort of these social communication faux pas, how to respond to them, and keep the upper hand, but also not alienate people. And his approach to criticism like this, would be something like repeating what they said back to them, or asking a question like, "Oh, what do you mean by that?" Or um, I think for me, a lot of times I'll just say thank you. Thank you is always great. Or like, thanks for letting me know. um, but if somebody is constantly aggressive, if this isn't just a one-off, and you want to sort of train that behavior out, then you can definitely go with something like asking a question like, "Oh, could you repeat that?" Or "Did you mean that to sound insulting?" Or what made you say that? Or, "Could you repeat that?" right? Or you just actually repeat what they said back to you. Like, you think my tie is ugly, right? Something like that. Or, like, you would never wear my shoes. Like, like, what are you trying to say with that? Um, Maybe there's an even more evolved response to criticism. I'm not there yet, but I did want to, record this podcast and talk about this this journey. There are stops along this journey. I didn't go from super sensitive to criticism all the way to really relaxed with criticism and responding really calmly overnight, right? This is like a 20-year gap. Not a 20-year gap, because if I was 19, it's like a 10 plus year gap. And I hope that you can, take one of these upgrades and apply it in your life. It may be that first upgrade of realizing that people aren't an authority on your life, and just not taking their words and criticism so seriously, not taking action on it, not feeling so hurt, not trying to change every time somebody doesn't like something about you. Even if it's something like that, or even if it is evolving from full-blown meltdown to, relaxed, snappy comeback, those are all growth steps. And I do think that the way that we handle criticism really opens the door for growth, because there is a lot of criticism that is going to come from a good source and a good place, love and care, and really wanting to see you grow. And until you can get intentional and start to filter the different kinds of criticism, and build out criteria for how you approach criticism and how you take it in and what you take, when you do that, that is really where your growth is going to start to take off. And someday, if you're not already, you may even start asking for critique, and you know laughing off the stuff that really doesn't hit, and being able to take from the parts that ring true. That's all for today. Thank you so much for coming to spend the time with me. I do have kind of a follow-up idea on this, and I'd like to record another podcast with some follow-up on this, so hopefully that will happen, and keep an eye out for that next week. Thank you for tuning in to the I Help Men Dress Better podcast. I really appreciate you spending your time with me. I know there's so many things you could be doing with your time, and I really hope you learned something. If you did enjoy this episode, if you could like, comment, share, subscribe. I know I'm supposed to just ask for one thing, but this is a longer piece of media. And I guess if I had one ask, it would be, if you enjoyed this and you know someone who would enjoy this or benefit from this, share it with them. I think it would go a long way to help them, and help the podcast as well. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful week. See you next week.